Ito ako to gives Maria.
I sat in the stiff leather chair and said, "This won't take long, right?" Mr. Hale adjusted his glasses and replied, "We'll begin when everyone is present." Ethan leaned back and said, "Relax, brother. You look nervous." I laughed and answered, "I'm not nervous. I just don't see why this has to be so formal." Clara squeezed my hand and whispered, "It's just procedure. Your grandfather loved you." I believed her. I truly did. Mr. Hale cleared his throat and said, "As you know, your grandfather revised his will shortly before his passing." I nodded and said, "He told me he wanted things settled cleanly." Ethan crossed his arms and smirked. I looked at him and said, "What?" He shrugged. "Nothing. Just waiting." Mr. Hale began reading. "To my grandson Ethan, I leave the family house, the savings accounts, and controlling shares of the company." I laughed again, softly, and said, "That's a joke, right?" No one laughed back. I leaned forward and said, "You missed something." Mr. Hale shook his head. "I'm not finished." My chest eased for half a second. "To Ethan, I also leave the land assets and the trust fund." I felt my smile freeze. I said, "And me?" Clara slowly pulled her hand away from mine. Ethan stared at the wall. Mr. Hale continued, "To my grandson," I cut in. "Say my name." He paused, then said, "To my grandson, I leave personal effects as listed in Appendix C." I stood up. "What personal effects?" Mr. Hale replied, "Books, watches, and sentimental items." I said, "That's it?" Silence pressed down on the room. I looked at Ethan and asked, "Did you know about this?" He answered, "Grandpa made his choice." I snapped, "That's not an answer." Clara finally spoke. "Please don't do this here." I turned to her and said, "Do what?" "Ask why my life just disappeared." My head filled with memories. I heard my grandfather saying, "You're the responsible one." I remembered him telling me, "One day, all of this will be yours to protect." I said, "He promised me." Mr. Hale replied, "Promises don't override signed documents." I asked, "Who helped him change it?" Ethan shifted. Clara's lips pressed together. I said, "Answer me." Mr. Hale hesitated. "The revision was prepared after several consultations." I asked, "With who?" Clara exhaled and said, "With me." The room spun. I stared at her and whispered, "You?" She nodded once. I asked, "Why would he listen to you?" She said, "Because he trusted me." I laughed, sharp and broken. "He trusted you because I trusted you." Ethan finally spoke. "Stop blaming her." I turned on him. "You stayed quiet." He said, "You would have fought it." I said, "Because it's wrong." Clara said softly, "It's practical." I felt heat crawl up my neck. I asked, "How long?" She answered, "Long enough." I said, "You smiled at me every night." She replied, "I was trying to survive." I stepped closer. "By selling me?" She shook her head. "By choosing stability." Mr. Hale said, "Please keep your voices down." I ignored him and asked, "Did you ever love me?" Clara looked away. That was my answer. I said, "You planned this." She whispered, "I helped guide him." I said, "You rewrote my future." Ethan muttered, "You were never meant to lead." I snapped back, "You never earned it." My hands shook. I remembered late nights with my grandfather, managing numbers, learning patience. I said, I carried him when he was weak. Mr. Hale said, the will is legal. I replied, so is betrayal. Clara said, I didn't do this to hurt you. I asked, then why does it feel like you aimed for my heart? She finally met my eyes. I chose security. Those words crushed everything. I nodded slowly and said, then you chose wrong. Ethan scoffed. You're being dramatic. I said, you took my name, my place, and my future. Mr. Hale stood. This meeting is over. I picked up my coat and said, no, it's not. Clara said, please don't make this harder. I answered, you already did. I walked toward the door and paused. I turned back and said, I hope it was worth it. No one stopped me. No one apologized. As I stepped outside, I realized something terrifying. I had walked in believing blood and love meant safety. I walked out knowing they meant nothing at all. I stood outside the house that night and said, open the door, Clara. From inside, she answered, you shouldn't be here. I laughed and said, funny. I lived here yesterday. The lock clicked, but the door didn't open. I said, you changed the code. She replied, Ethan asked me to. I leaned my forehead against the door and said, did you even argue? She stayed quiet. That silence hurt more than shouting. I said, look at me when you talk. The door opened a crack. Clara said, lower your voice. I stepped inside and said, so this is it? She crossed her arms. This is what happened. I asked, no. This is what you planned. She said, you're twisting it. I answered, you twisted the will. Ethan came down the stairs and said, I told you he'd cause trouble. I looked at him and said, you already took everything. What else do you want? He replied, peace. I laughed. You stole my life and want peace? He said, you never fit here. Clara snapped, stop it, both of you. I turned to her. When did you start choosing sides? She said, I chose reality. I asked, and I was what? A dream? She rubbed her temples and said, you didn't have a plan. I replied, I had loyalty. Ethan scoffed. Loyalty doesn't pay bills. I stepped closer to him. You waited years for this. He said, I waited for my turn. I asked Clara, how long did you know? She said, before the hospital. I froze. When he was sick? She nodded. I whispered, you sat beside me and smiled. She said, I didn't know how to tell you. I raised my voice. So you let paper speak for you? Ethan said, enough. She's with me now. Those words burned. I said, you didn't just take my money. You took her too. Clara said, I wasn't yours to take. I swallowed hard. Then why did you promise? She answered, because I believed you'd rise. I said, and when I didn't? She replied, I chose security. The same words again. I felt smaller hearing them. I asked Ethan, did you pressure him? He shrugged. I helped him see options. I said, by poisoning him against me? He replied, by telling the truth. I laughed. Your truth. Clara said, please leave. I looked around and said, my grandfather's photos are gone. Ethan said, they're stored. I asked, or erased? No one answered. That was answer enough. I walked toward the study and said, I need my things. Ethan blocked me. Not tonight. I said, "You're scared I'll find something." He leaned in and said, "You already lost." I replied, "You think this ends here?" Clara said, "Don't threaten him." I said, "I'm not threatening. I'm remembering." She frowned. "What does that mean?" I said, "It means I see you now." Her voice softened. "I didn't want you broken." I answered, "Then why am I bleeding?" She reached for me, then stopped. I said, "Don't." Ethan said, "Pack his stuff." I stared at him. "You don't get to order her." He replied, "I do now." Clara whispered, "Please go." I nodded slowly. I walked to the door and said, "You chose him because he was safe." She said nothing. I added, "Safety isn't strength." Outside, the air felt cold. I checked my phone and saw my access accounts locked. I laughed quietly. I said to myself, they planned this perfectly. The thought hurt, but it also cleared something in me. I remembered every night I ignored doubt. Every time my grandfather warned me not to trust blindly. I whispered, "This is my fault too." The door locked behind me. I stood there and said, "That sound will haunt you." No one replied. I walked away knowing one thing. They didn't just betray me. They underestimated what losing everything would turn me into. I stumbled down the empty street, rain soaking through my jacket. I whispered, "It's over. All of it is over." Ethan's smirk, Clara's cold smile, they burned in my mind. I thought, maybe I should disappear. A car passed, its lights blinding me. I muttered, "No, not like this." I gripped the railing by the bridge and said, "Maybe it's easier if I end it." My hands trembled. Memories of my grandfather flashed. "You were meant to protect this family," he had said. I shouted, "I failed." I took a step forward. The wind whipped my face. I closed my eyes. Goodbye. A scream ripped from my chest. Metal hit bone. Pain exploded. I blacked out. When I opened my eyes, everything felt wrong and familiar. I whispered, "Where am I?" The morning sunlight streamed through my bedroom window. My heart thumped. This is my room. I ran to the mirror. I looked younger. Younger. I'm back. I laughed, shaking. It's a second chance. I touched my face. I can fix this. I grabbed my phone. No messages. No threats. No betrayal yet. I said, "I can see everything coming." I paced the room. What would I do differently? I asked aloud. I remembered Clara's smile, Ethan's hesitation, my grandfather's trust. I whispered, "I won't fail them, or me, again." I went downstairs. The kitchen smelled of morning coffee. My mother appeared. "You're up early." I smiled faintly. "Yeah, couldn't sleep." She didn't notice the weight in my eyes. I said, "I have to be careful this time." She frowned. "Careful about what?" I shook my head. "Nothing." I sat at the table, coffee steaming, and planned. "I'll watch. I'll listen. I'll remember." I murmured every betrayal, every lie. "I'll know it before it happens." I thought about Clara. She smiled at me while helping Ethan. I clenched my fists. Not this time. Not ever. I remembered the will, the reading, the cold look in Mr. Hale's eyes. I whispered, everything will be different. I'll take back what's mine, and more. Ethan came into the kitchen. Morning. I smiled at him faintly. Morning. He said, you look tired. I nodded. Long night. He left, oblivious to the storm forming inside me. I went to my grandfather's study. Papers, books, memories, I touched each one carefully. I whispered, you trusted me once. I'll make you proud. Clara appeared at the door. You're up early. I said nothing. She stepped closer. I wanted to say, I interrupted, save your words. This time, I'm listening differently. Her eyes widened. What do you mean? I smirked faintly. I mean, I know now. I see everything before it happens. She frowned. I don't understand. I leaned closer. You will. And you won't like it. She stepped back, unease creeping in. I whispered to myself, I have a second chance. I won't waste it. I'll take everything, and they'll regret it. I opened the window, letting in the morning air. I said, it's time to start. I walked to the door. This life, this second chance, is mine. I stepped out, heart pounding, mind racing. I whispered everything I lost. I'll reclaim it. And this time, I won't leave a single weakness. The city looked the same. But I wasn't the same. I whispered one last time before the streets swallowed me, let them underestimate me. Let them believe I'm broken. Because this time, I'm watching. And I'm ready. I sat across from my grandfather in his study and said, you look tired today. He smiled and replied, old bones don't hide much anymore. I said, you should rest more. He waved me off. I still have work to do. I watched his hands shake as he signed papers. I asked, do you trust everyone around you? He looked up. That's a strange question. I shrugged. Just thinking out loud. He chuckled. Trust is all I have left. Those words hit harder this time. I nodded and said, then I'll help you protect it. He studied me. You sound serious. I met his eyes. I am. Later that day, I ran into Clara in the hallway. She smiled. You've been quiet. I replied, I've been listening. She laughed lightly. You always listen. I thought, not like before. I said, you've been spending a lot of time with Grandpa. She answered, someone has to keep him company. I asked, and help with decisions? Her smile stiffened. I give opinions. I nodded. Opinions can change lives. She said, you're being dramatic again. I leaned closer. Am I? That night, I called Mr. Hale. He answered, this is unexpected. I said, I'd like to understand the estate better. He replied, your grandfather hasn't finalized anything. I said, but drafts exist. Silence followed. He said, you're very observant. I smiled. I've learned to be. He cleared his throat. We can talk. The next morning, Ethan joined me for breakfast. He said, you've been hanging around the study. I answered, I care. He scoffed. Since when? I looked at him and said, since I realized what's at stake. He replied, you're acting strange. I shrugged. People grow. He leaned in. Don't overthink things. I smiled. I underthought them once. In my room, I recorded notes on my phone. I whispered, every lie leaves a pattern. I remembered Clara suggesting legal changes. I remembered Ethan's silence. I said, I won't miss it again. Later, I met Mr. Hale in his office. He said, why the sudden interest? I replied, because I plan to stay. He adjusted his tie. Staying means responsibility. I said, I'm ready. He slid documents across the desk. I asked, who requested revisions last time? He hesitated. I smiled. Honesty saves time. He sighed. Your grandfather listens to Clara. I nodded. I know. I left feeling calm. Power wasn't loud. It was quiet. That evening, Clara asked, why are you distant? I answered, because distance shows clarity. She frowned. You're different. I smiled. You haven't even seen it yet. I stood alone and whispered, I remember everything. Every smile. Every pause. Every choice. I wasn't angry. I was awake. I met Lena in the cafe and said, I need your help. She looked up from her coffee. With what? I smiled faintly. Rebuilding what was stolen from me. She raised an eyebrow. That's ambitious. I replied, I've learned patience. She laughed softly. Ambition paired with patience is dangerous. I said, good. I like dangerous. She leaned closer. Then tell me everything. I began, Ethan and Clara, they underestimated me. They always do. Her eyes sharpened. So we plan. I nodded. Step by step. Every move visible, every weakness noted. Later that night, I called Clara. She answered, I didn't expect your call. I said, expectations are dangerous. She laughed lightly. What are you planning now? I replied, observing. Waiting. Learning. I met Ethan the next day in the office. He said, you're unusually quiet. I smiled. I'm listening. He frowned. Since when do you listen? I leaned back. Since I realized silence speaks louder than words. That evening, I went to my grandfather's study. Clara appeared at the door. Working late again? I said, someone has to keep an eye on things. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I whispered, I see it. Ethan called me later. You're too careful. I answered, I'm careful because I remember. He said, you can't change what's done. I replied, I can change what's coming. I returned to Lena. We start with the finances. She nodded. I'll build a model. I said, perfect. Then every move Clara makes will be predictable. A few days later, I ran into Clara at the company lobby. She said, you seem different. I smiled. I've seen the truth. Her eyes narrowed. What truth? I whispered, the one you tried to hide. Ethan joined her. Stop staring. I replied, I'm not staring. I'm remembering. He frowned. Remembering what? I said, every choice you made against me. Clara stepped closer. Don't be dramatic. I said, I'm not being dramatic. I'm calculating. She paused. You've changed. I smiled faintly. I've just learned. That night, I watched them through the office window. Ethan laughed, oblivious. Clara smiled, thinking she was untouchable. I whispered, they don't see it coming. Not yet. I met Lena again. We'll move slowly. she said, step by step. I nodded. Every small victory counts. The next morning, I greeted Clara at breakfast. She said, "You look calm today." I smiled. Calm before action. She frowned. Action? I leaned in. You'll see. Later, I recalled my grandfather's words: patience, observation, and timing. Your power is quiet, but it's unstoppable. I whispered to myself, I've remembered everything. And now, I act. I walked past Clara's office and said under my breath, "Smile all you want. You're trapped in your own choices." No one noticed. That was the best part. I walked into the hospital room and said, "Good morning, Grandpa." He smiled weakly. "You're early." I replied, "I wanted to see you before anyone else." He chuckled softly. "You always were observant." Clara appeared in the doorway. "I didn't expect you here." I said, "I like to know what's happening." She frowned. "Is that necessary?" I shrugged. "Necessary for me. Not for you." Ethan came down the hallway. "You're quiet today." I said, "I'm thinking." He laughed lightly. "You're always thinking." Grandpa coughed. "Your mother says I need rest." I replied, "Rest can wait. We need clarity first." He looked at me, concerned. "Clarity about what?" I said, "About everything that matters. About us." Clara hesitated. "I can help with decisions." I smiled faintly. "You've helped enough already." Her lips pressed together. "Be careful what you say." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "We're trying to do what's best." I said, "For whom?" My grandfather's hand trembled as he held the papers. I whispered, "It's your choice, Grandpa. But remember who really sees the truth." Mr. Hale entered quietly. "The revisions are ready." I said, "Yes, let's review them." I noticed Clara's face tighten. "Why are you watching?" I replied, "I always watch." We sat around the table. I asked Mr. Hale, "Who suggested the latest changes?" He hesitated. "Your grandfather wanted input from someone he trusted." I smiled faintly. "And that was?" He avoided my eyes. "Clara." I leaned back. "Of course." Clara's eyes widened. I said softly, "Did you think I wouldn't notice?" Ethan muttered, "We're just trying to protect the estate." I said, "You mean protect yourselves." Grandpa coughed again. "Enough. I want this done fairly." I said, "Fairly means the truth is known, not hidden." Clara said, "You're being difficult." I replied, "I'm being honest." Mr. Hale finally spoke. "We can revise again if necessary." I said, "It is necessary." Clara tried to interrupt. "Don't," I said, "let me speak." I turned to Grandpa. "You loved me too. I want to help protect what's yours." He looked at me and nodded slowly. Clara's shoulders stiffened. Ethan's face flushed. I whispered under my breath, "Patience. Let them stumble." Later, I reviewed every paper with Mr. Hale. I asked questions, noted inconsistencies, checked signatures. Clara hovered, trying to guide my grandfather, but I stayed calm. I said, "I'm taking notes. Every detail counts." She tried to smile. "You're paranoid." I replied, "I'm prepared." Ethan said, "You can't control everything." I laughed softly. Control comes from knowing, not forcing. By evening, the will was revised under Grandpa's careful eyes. I said, "Thank you, Grandpa. I won't forget this." He whispered, "I never doubted you." Clara left the room quietly. Ethan followed her. I stayed with my grandfather. I whispered, "I see everything now. And they don't see me at all." I watched the door close and said to myself, their confidence is fading. And mine is growing. Tomorrow, everything will change. They just don't know it yet. The day finally came. I walked into the office and said, "Good morning, everyone." Clara looked up, her smile forced. "You're early." I replied, "I like to set the tone." Ethan scowled. "Tone won't change what's done." I smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but timing does." Mr. Hale cleared his throat. "We're here to finalize the estate." I said, "Let's make sure it's accurate this time." Clara muttered under her breath, always careful. I asked, "Did you think I'd forget?" She froze. Ethan said, "We can handle this peacefully." I replied, "Peacefully? You mean quietly losing?" Mr. Hale handed out the final documents. I asked, "Who prepared these?" He said, "After thorough review and your grandfather's approval." I smiled faintly. "So every choice is visible now?" He nodded. I turned to Clara. "You look nervous." She said, "I'm fine." I laughed softly. "You're not." Ethan tried to interject. "Don't make this personal." I said, "It's already personal." Clara whispered, "You won't," I interrupted, "I already have." The documents were signed. I inherited everything, company, land, and trust. Ethan paled. Clara's lips trembled. I said, "It's legal. It's fair. It's finally true." Ethan muttered, "This isn't right." I replied, "It's justice." Clara finally spoke, voice small. I never wanted this to hurt anyone." I said, "Then why did it?" She couldn't answer. Ethan tried to argue, "You can't just take it all." I smiled. "Watch me." The office phones rang endlessly. Clients called asking questions. Accounts froze. Assets shifted. I whispered, "Let them feel the consequences." Clara's face drained of color. Ethan's hands shook. I said, "Do you feel it? The world turning on your choices?" Clara dropped her head. "I didn't know it would be like this." I said, "You chose wrongly. And now, you pay." Ethan whispered, "This isn't the end." I laughed softly. "It is for you." Mr. Hale looked at me. "You handled this perfectly." I nodded. I remembered everything. And I waited. Clara stepped back. "Please. I can explain." I replied, "No explanation can undo what's done." Ethan stammered, "You'll regret this." I said, "Regret? Look at yourselves." Every small misstep they made in greed and pride now collapsed. Accounts lost value, investors pulled out, trust shattered. I said softly, "This is natural. Karma always finds a way." Clara looked at me, tears brimming. I whispered, "You underestimated me. You underestimated patience." Ethan's shoulders slumped. I added, "Every choice has a cost. Yours just came due." I walked out of the office quietly. They didn't follow. Outside, I breathed deeply. The city felt different, lighter. I whispered, "Justice doesn't need violence. It just needs truth and timing." Behind me, Clara and Ethan faced the ruin they created. I smiled faintly. Karma had knocked. And this time, it didn't miss. I arrived at the house and said, "Clara, we need to talk." She looked up, eyes red. "There's nothing to say." I replied, "You know that's not true." Ethan stepped out from the hallway. "Stop this." I said, "No, it's time you both face what you did." Clara whispered, "Please, don't make this worse." I laughed softly. "I'm not making this worse. You already did that to yourselves." Ethan said, "You don't understand." I interrupted, "Oh, I understand perfectly." Clara fell to her knees. "I'm sorry. I never wanted this to happen." I knelt slightly, watching her. "Never wanted it?" "You smiled at me while helping him steal my life." She covered her face with her hands. "I chose him, because I thought it was safer." I said, "Safer? You call destroying me safe?" Ethan shouted, "Enough. Stop tormenting her." I looked at him and said, "Tormenting? No. I'm showing you the truth." Clara begged, "Please, just forgive me." I shook my head slowly. "Forgive you? I can't forget what you chose. I can't ignore it either." Ethan said, "You're being cruel." I replied, "Cruel? No. I'm being fair." Clara sobbed. I never meant to hurt you." I said, "Intent doesn't erase results. You both made your choices." Ethan's face twisted with guilt. "I didn't know it would end like this." I replied, "And now you know." I stepped back, letting the weight of their mistakes sink in. Clara whispered, "I'll do anything to make it right." I said softly, "Anything? Some things can't be fixed." Ethan fell to his knees. I've lost everything." "I didn't think," I said, "you didn't think. And that's why you're here." Clara tried to reach for me. "Please, don't leave me like this." I shook my head. "I'm leaving exactly because of this." I glanced at the house, memories flashing, the rooms I grew up in, the laughter, the promises. I whispered, "This was supposed to be mine." Clara whimpered, "I never." I said, "Stop. Your words don't matter anymore." I turned to Ethan. "You wanted power without effort. Look where it brought you." He lowered his head. "I see now." Clara sobbed again, voice breaking. "I'm begging you. I'll change." I said quietly, "I'm past change. You'll live with your choices." I walked toward the door. Ethan called weakly, "Don't go." I replied, "It's too late." The door closed behind me. I breathed in the cold evening air and said softly, "They begged. They broke." And I walked away. I smiled faintly. This time, I kept my peace, and they lost theirs. The city lights shimmered, but I felt free. I whispered everything I lost. I've reclaimed. And I left them with nothing. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I only felt the quiet, sharp satisfaction of someone who finally got justice. I woke early, sunlight spilling across the apartment I had rented in secret. I whispered to myself, "It's done. Every last piece is mine." Lena was already awake. "Morning," she said softly. I smiled faintly. "Morning. Did you sleep well?" She nodded. "Better than I expected." "How are you?" I replied, different. Calm. Focused. Ready. I poured coffee and said, "It feels strange, taking everything and leaving nothing behind for them." Lena sipped hers. But you earned it. I nodded slowly. I did. And now it's time to close the door completely. I thought of Clara and Ethan, begging, broken, powerless. I whispered, they don't deserve another chance. Not from me. I packed the last of my belongings from the estate. Clara called. Please, can we talk? I smiled faintly. Talk? There's nothing left to say. She begged, I made mistakes. I interrupted, yes, you did. And you paid for them. Ethan sent a message, we can fix this. Don't leave. I typed back, it's already fixed. I'm leaving. I stood at the front door of the mansion. The keys to everything I had once lost were in my hand. I whispered, I took it all. And I'm leaving the past behind. Lena asked, where will you go? I shrugged. Anywhere. Somewhere they can't touch me, anywhere I can be free. She smiled faintly. Do you feel regret? I shook my head. No. Not this time. I looked back at the house once more. Memories flashed, grandfather's words, Clara's smile, Ethan's jealousy. I whispered, I remember everything. And now I choose my own path. The city stirred as I stepped into a taxi. I leaned back, hands clasped, heart steady. I said quietly, I built this life. I earned it. And no one can take it from me again. Lena reached over, touching my hand gently. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. I smiled. I don't. But I needed to walk away before I could carry anything else. The taxi pulled into traffic. I watched the streets fade past the window, lights blurring into lines of possibility. I whispered everything they stole. I reclaimed. Everything they thought I lost. I transformed. Clara and Ethan were behind me, lost in the ruins of their choices. I was ahead, unburdened, unstoppable. I smiled faintly and said aloud, this time, I'm free. Truly free. The city stretched before me, and I knew one thing, I had won, not through anger, not through hate, but by remembering, waiting, and acting. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and whispered, let them watch. I walk into the life I was always meant to have. And for the first time in years, I felt peace.